There is a cigar box in my closet. Inside that box, wrapped in a piece of cotton that my wife Elena once used to line our daughter's baptism dress, there is a necklace made of bone. 6 bones. Each one the size of a man's thumb, yellowed, smooth, warm to the touch even when the room is cold. Those bones are older than this country. They came from the hand of something that should not exist. Something that walks upright in the deepest parts of the Big Cypress. Something that has been there longer than the Seminole, longer than the Spanish, longer than any word in any language spoken on this continent. A Seminole elder gave me that necklace 31 years ago. He told me his grandmother pulled those bones from the wreckage of the Okeechobee hurricane of 1926. He told me they came from one of them, the ones his people call by a name I was asked never to repeat. My name is Roberto Cisneros. Most people who know me call me Bobby. I am 74 years old. I am dying, and I am done being quiet. The doctors at the clinic in Immokalee told me 18 months ago that the tremors in my hands were not just age. They said it was ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. They told me what would happen, the muscles, the voice, the swallowing, the breathing. I sat in that fluorescent room nodding like I understood. But all I could think about was that cigar box and the woman who died 7 years ago without ever knowing why I kept it. My right hand does not work the way it used to. Some mornings I cannot grip a coffee mug. Some mornings I cannot button my own shirt. The muscles in my throat are beginning to tighten. The words are getting harder to push out. So I am pushing them out now, while I still can. Because what I am about to tell you is something I have never told anyone. Not my daughters, not my priest, not my wife, especially not my wife. And that is the part that haunts me most. I was 43 years old in the summer of 1993. I had been working as a property and casualty insurance adjuster for Southeastern Mutual out of their Fort Myers office for almost 14 years. I was not a man of the woods. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I grew up in Hialeah, son of a mechanic from Guadalajara who came to Florida in 1961 and never left. My childhood smelled like motor oil in my mother's albondigas. The wildest thing I ever tracked as a boy was a roach across the kitchen floor while my abuela shouted directions from her chair. I was a city kid who became a city man. Short-sleeved dress shirts, clipboard, Polaroid camera. I documented hail damage on rooftops in Cape Coral for a living. I assessed risk. I calculated loss. I reduced human suffering to line items on claims forms. I was not looking for anything. I need you to understand that. Because everything I am about to tell you depends on you believing that I did not go searching for this. I did not read books about monsters. I did not watch documentaries about the unexplained. I did not camp in the woods with night vision cameras hoping to catch something moving between the trees. I was a man who went to work, came home, kissed his wife, helped his daughters with their math, and fell asleep watching the 11 o'clock news. That man does not go looking for things that rewrite the rules of the natural world. But sometimes the natural world rewrites them for you. In July of '93, something found me. My supervisor handed me a file. A man named Dale Hinton owned a cattle ranch on the eastern edge of Hendry County, right against the boundary of the Big Cypress National Preserve. 14 head of cattle lost over 3 months, partially consumed or simply gone. Hinton blamed panthers. The claim was nearly $40,000. Southeastern Mutual wanted someone to drive out and inspect. My supervisor said, "Swampland and middle of nowhere," like he was sentencing me. He was not wrong. I drove out on July 13th, the day after my daughter Sophia's quinceañera. My back was still sore from moving folding tables at the church hall. Elena had spent 3 months planning that party. She had sewn part of the dress herself. I can still see her at the kitchen table with pins between her lips telling me the pink was not the right pink. She needed a pink with more warmth. I told her I could not see the difference. She told me that was because I was a man and men see the world in 12 colors while women see it in 12,000. She was right about most things. She was right about almost everything, except trusting me. The drive took 3 hours. The last 40 minutes were on unpaved roads that turned my sedan into a percussion instrument. Hendry County out that far east is a different Florida. Not the Florida of beaches and retirement condos. It is flat and green and wet and ancient. Sawgrass prairies stretching to the horizon, cypress domes rising like dark islands, vultures circling so high they looked like pepper against the white sky. The air was so heavy that stepping out of the car felt like walking into a warm, wet mouth. Dale Hinton was lean and sun-damaged, spoke in a slow drawl that made every sentence feel like it was being dragged through mud. He walked me through the property, showed me the fencing, showed me the carcass sites. Most of the remains had been cleaned up, but he had photographs. He had kept bones. He showed me drag marks leading toward the tree line where his property met the preserve. I photographed everything, made my notes, checked my boxes, standard procedure. But something about the drag marks bothered me. They were too wide, too deep. A Florida panther weighs maybe 130 pounds. These marks looked like something you would see behind a tractor. I knelt beside one and ran my hand along the edge of the depression, and I could feel the force that had been applied. Whatever made this mark had dragged 400 pounds of dead weight across packed earth without pausing. Without veering, a straight line from the pasture to the trees. As if the thing doing the dragging was so strong it did not even notice the weight. I noted the discrepancy. I said nothing. That was not my job. But here is the thing about being an insurance adjuster. You spend your whole career looking for the detail that does not fit, the crack in the foundation that explains the water damage, the wiring that explains the fire. You train your eyes to find the thing everyone else missed. And I had found it. Hinton invited me to stay the night. His wife cooked pork chops. We sat on his screened porch listening to the frogs and the gators. I called Elena from his kitchen phone. She told me Sophia was already talking about college. I laughed and said the girl just turned 15. Elena said that was how time worked. It jumped when you were not watching. She was right about that too. At 2:15 in the morning I was woken by a sound. I need you to understand something. I have spent 31 years trying to find words for this sound, and I have failed every single time. It was not a scream, not a howl, not a bark. It was something between a moan and a bellow. Deep, resonant, sorrowful, like a church organ being played in a minor key by something that had never learned music but understood grief. It came from the tree line, maybe 300 yards out. It repeated 3 times, each time slightly different in pitch, each time carrying a different weight. Then silence. Not just quiet, silence. The frogs stopped, the insects stopped. Every living thing within a mile stopped breathing to listen. In the morning I asked Hinton about it. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said something I will never forget. Mr. Cisneros, there are things out in that preserve that have been here longer than any of us. Longer than the Seminole, longer than the Spanish. And they do not want to be known. I should have listened to him. I should have driven home and filed the claim and kissed my wife and taken my daughters to the beach and never thought about Hendry County again. But as I walked to my car that morning, I saw it. A footprint. A single massive footprint pressed into the mud where the pasture met the cypress stand. 18 inches long, 7 inches wide, 5 toes, not a bear, not a gator, not anything in any textbook or nature documentary or museum I had ever seen. It looked human, except for the scale, as if someone had taken a man's foot and enlarged it by a factor of 3. I stared at it. Then I took a Polaroid. Then I drove home, and I told no one, not Elena, not my supervisor. I filed the claim, recommended partial approval, put the Polaroid in my desk drawer under a stack of old files. But I could not stop thinking about that footprint. At night, lying beside Elena while she slept, I would close my eyes and hear that sound again, that deep, mournful bellow, and I would feel something pull at me, something I could not name, like a fishhook buried somewhere behind my sternum. I had never been a curious man. I was methodical. I was practical. I assessed damage and calculated risk. But that footprint cracked something open inside me, and what leaked through was a hunger I had never known, a hunger to know. 2 weeks later, I told Elena I was going fishing with a man from the office. I drove back to Hendry County, not to Hinton's ranch, to the Big Cypress Preserve itself. I parked at a trailhead off Turner River Road and walked into the cypress swamp with a backpack, a camera, a compass, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. The heat was staggering. By noon, my shirt was soaked. My feet were blistered inside my work boots because I did not own hiking boots. I was an insurance adjuster from Hialeah walking through one of the most remote wilderness areas in the southeastern United States wearing dockers and a polo shirt. If anyone had seen me, they would have called the Park Service. But no one saw me. That was the thing about Big Cypress. You could walk for hours and see nothing but trees and water and sky and the occasional heron lifting from a slough like a gray angel. The loneliness was immense, and within it, I felt something watching me. I found nothing that first trip, or the second, or the third, but I kept going back. Every 2 weeks, then every weekend. I told Elena I had joined a fishing group, a man named Gary, Lake Okeechobee trips. She had no reason to doubt me. She trusted me completely. And that trust was a knife I pushed deeper into my own chest every single time I lied. My mother always said a lie is a debt you pay with interest. She was right. The interest compounded for decades. But I could not stop. On my 9th trip, October of '93, I met the man who changed everything. I came around a stand of cypress and found an old man sitting on a fallen log, cleaning a fish with a bone-handled knife. He looked up at me without surprise, as if he had been expecting me. He was Seminole. I could see it in his face, the broad cheekbones, the dark eyes that held a depth I had only seen in my abuela's eyes. The eyes of someone who has watched the world long enough to stop being impressed by it. He said, "You are the one who keeps coming back." Not a question, a statement. I asked him how he knew. He said the land tells him. He said the animals change their patterns when a new person enters, and he reads the animals the way I read a claims form. His name was Joseph Billy, 81 years old. Lived on or near the reservation his entire life. Then he said it. "You heard them. That is why you keep coming back." I asked what he meant by them. He looked at me for a long time, measuring something. Then he said a word in his language, a word I will not repeat because he asked me not to. He said it was the old word, the one his grandmother used, the one spoken in the Chickie camps before the government tried to move his people to Oklahoma. It meant something like, the old ones who walk upright, the first people of the cypress. He said they had been here since before memory. I sat down across from him and listened. Joseph Billy spoke slowly, carefully, the way a man speaks when he is handing you something fragile and does not want you to drop it. He told me his people had known about the creatures for generations, not feared exactly, respected. The way you respect a river, understanding that it gives life and can take it away with equal indifference. He said they were intelligent. He said they had families. He said they grieved their dead. He said once, when he was a young man, maybe 19 or 20, he had come upon one of them standing in a clearing at dusk. It turned and looked at him, and in its eyes he saw recognition, not surprise, not fear. Recognition. As if it knew what he was and had decided he was not a threat. He said they stood there for perhaps 2 minutes. Then it turned and walked into the cypress and vanished without a sound, despite being at least 7.5 feet tall, despite weighing what he guessed was over 500 pounds. He said the ground did not seem to register its footsteps. He said it moved through the forest the way water moves through water. I asked him why he was telling me this. A stranger, an outsider, a Mexican-American insurance adjuster who had no connection to his people or his land. He was quiet for a while. Then he said something that I think about every single day. He said, "The land does not choose by blood, it chooses by listening. You are the first person in a long time who came here and listened instead of looking." I did not fully understand what he meant then. I do now. Most people who come to the wilderness come with eyes. They scan, they search, they point cameras and binoculars and spotlights. Joseph said the creatures can feel that kind of seeing. It is aggressive to them. It is predatory. But listening is different. Listening is receptive. Listening is what the forest does. And when you listen long enough, the forest begins to trust you the way it trusts its own trees. Before I left that afternoon, Joseph reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a necklace. A leather cord strung with 6 small bones, yellowed with age, smooth from years of handling. He held it out to me. I did not understand at first. I thought he was showing me an artifact. But he pressed it toward me, insistent. His eyes held something I can only describe as relief. The relief of a man setting down a load he has carried too long. He said his grandmother gave it to him when he was a boy. She said the bones came from the hand of one who died in the Great Storm of 1926. The Okeechobee Hurricane. She found them afterward. In the wreckage of the forest. She kept them to remember that they suffer too, that the storms do not spare them. He pressed the necklace into my palm. The bones were warm, as if they had been sitting in sunlight, though we were deep in shade. He said, "You are meant to carry this now. I am too old to walk out there anymore, and someone must remember." Joseph told me those bones had been tested once. Quietly. A biologist at the University of Florida, back in the 70s. The biologist said they were primate bones but did not match any known species. He wanted to publish. Joseph took the necklace back and never spoke to the man again. He said some things are not meant for journals. Some things are meant for carrying. I drove home that night with the necklace under my shirt. When I walked through the front door, Elena was watching a telenovela. Sophia was doing homework. Marisol was asleep on the couch with a stuffed bear. The house smelled like Elena's chicken pozole. I stood in the doorway and felt the necklace against my chest like a second heartbeat. And I understood that I was now carrying something I could never put down. I kissed Elena. She tasted like lime and cilantro. She asked how the fishing was. I said it was good. That was the first lie that mattered. Not the first lie about where I had been. The first one I felt settle into the space between us like a stone dropped into a still pond. Over the next several years, I kept going back. Joseph Billy became my guide, my teacher, my friend. He showed me the signs, bent trees forming directional markers, stick structures too deliberate to be natural, knocking sounds carrying through the cypress like telegraph. He taught me to sit still. An insurance adjuster is trained to move through a scene quickly. Document, assess, move on. Joseph taught me the opposite. The creatures would not reveal themselves to a man in motion. Only to a man who had become part of the landscape, as still and patient as a cypress knee. I learned to sit for hours. I learned to breathe so quietly that mosquitoes would land on my face and I would not flinch. The first time I saw one was March 7th, 1995. I know the exact date because I wrote it on the inside cover of a small notebook, along with every other date, every other detail. The meticulous handwriting of an insurance adjuster cataloging the most extraordinary claim ever filed against the boundaries of human knowledge. I was sitting at the base of a cypress tree in the quiet grove, about 2 miles from any trail. The sun was going down. The light was that deep amber that makes everything look dipped in honey. And it stepped out from behind a cluster of cypress trunks, 60 yards away. My heart stopped. I mean that literally. I felt it pause, skip, restart with a thud I felt in my teeth. It was enormous, 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in hair that was dark reddish-brown, almost the color of dried blood. On its chest and face the hair was thinner. I could see skin that was grayish. It walked upright, fully bipedal, with a fluidity that contradicted its size. It did not lumber. It did not crash. It moved with the deliberate grace of something that had been walking this forest longer than I could comprehend. Its arms hung past its knees. Its hands were massive, fingers curling slightly as it walked. But the face. The face is what stopped me, not an ape, not a man, something in between, something that occupied a space taxonomy had not charted. Heavy brow, flat wide nose, powerful jaw, and the eyes, dark, almost black, holding an intelligence I recognized not because I had seen it in an animal, but because I had seen it in people. In my abuela who could not read but could tell you the history of her village going back 5 generations. In Elena who could look at me across a room and know what I was feeling before I knew it myself. Those eyes were aware. They were thinking. They were old in a way that had nothing to do with the age of the individual and everything to do with the age of whatever it was. It walked to a small pond, knelt, cupped water in its hands and drank. The sound of it drinking was the most human thing I had ever heard from a non-human mouth. When it finished, it sat back on its haunches and looked at the water, and I saw something in its posture that I can only call contemplation. It sat there for 5 minutes, just looking at the water. Then it stood, walked back into the cypress. Gone. I wept. Not from fear, not from shock, from something I still cannot name. A feeling like the floor of everything I thought I understood had dropped away and I was falling into a space larger and more beautiful and more terrifying than anything I had imagined. I wept because it was real. I wept because it was magnificent. And I wept because I knew I could never tell Elena, not because she would not believe me. Elena lit candles for the saints. She left water out during Dia de los Muertos. She understood the world contained more than what could be measured and filed. But telling her would mean making her carry a secret that was not hers. Worrying about a husband spending weekends in a swamp chasing something most people would call a hallucination. I told myself I was protecting her. I know now I was protecting myself. What I did not know then, what I could not have known, was that the choice I made in that moment would become the defining failure of my life. Every marriage has a wall somewhere, a place where one person ends and the other cannot follow. For some couples it is money. For others it is family. For us it was the big cypress. And I built that wall one lie at a time, one weekend at a time, one the fishing was good at a time, until it was so high that I could not see over it anymore and Elena had stopped trying to look. But that came later. In March of 1995, sitting at the base of that cypress tree with tears running into my collar, all I knew was that I had seen something that should not exist. And I needed to see it again. I named the creature Viejo. The old one, because something about the way it carried itself reminded me of the old men in my father's neighborhood in Guadalajara. Men who sat on benches in the plaza watching the world with a patience that came from having survived enough of it to no longer be in a hurry. The years that followed were the most divided of my life. During the week, I was Bobby Cisneros, insurance adjuster, husband, father, parishioner at St. Cecilia's, the man who brought tres leches cake to the church potluck and coached Marisol's softball team and slow danced with Elena in the kitchen when she thought nobody was watching. On the weekends, I was someone else, someone building a relationship with a creature most people would say does not exist. Because that is what happened. Over months, then years, Viejo began to allow my presence. Glacially slow. The way trust builds between two beings with no shared language and every reason to be afraid of each other. I brought offerings, not food, gifts. A smooth river stone from my mother-in-law's garden, a small wooden cross my father had carved, a red bandana from my grandfather in Guadalajara, still carrying the faint smell of the lime groves he worked as a young man. I left them at a particular cypress tree. They disappeared within days. In their place, I found things. A perfect bird's nest woven tight as a basket, a turtle shell cleaned and polished, a piece of quartz that caught light like a small sun. An exchange, a conversation conducted in objects instead of words. By 1997, the creature would allow me within 30 feet. I could see details that took my breath away. The texture of its hair, coarse and layered like a dog's undercoat, the way its nostrils flared when processing a new scent, thick calluses on the soles of its feet visible when it sat cross-legged on the ground, a scar running diagonally across its left shoulder, pale line through dark fur, healed long ago but still visible, and always the eyes, thinking, watching, measuring. There were moments during those early years when I questioned my own sanity. I am a man who spent his career in the business of verification. I photographed damage. I measured dimensions. I confirmed or denied claims based on physical evidence. And here I was, sitting in a swamp, trading trinkets with a creature that every rational part of my brain told me could not be real. But every time I doubted, I would look at the objects left for me at the base of that tree. A bird's nest woven with a precision that no wind or accident could produce. A turtle shell cleaned in a way that required hands. Deliberate hands. Thinking hands, and the doubt would dissolve like mist in morning sun. Elena noticed the change. She did not say it directly. She said it in the margins. She said I seemed far away at dinner. She asked if something was wrong at work. I said no too quickly. She reached for my hand in bed one night, and I flinched because my mind was in the swamp. She said, "Bobby, where do you go? Even when you are here, you are somewhere else." I told her work stress. Getting older. She accepted it with grace. And her grace was worse than any accusation. The year 2000 brought two things. Sophia married a good man named David, an electrician from Coral Springs who loved her in the obvious, uncomplicated way I envied. And Joseph Billy died, November 14th, in his sleep on the reservation, 88 years old. I drove to the edge of the preserve and pressed the bone necklace against my chest and cried until the sun went down. Joseph had been the only person who knew. With him gone, I was alone with it. Completely alone. I had Elena and my daughters and my grandchildren and my church community. And I was the loneliest man in Florida. After Joseph died, something shifted. On my first visit back, Viejo came closer than ever before, within 15 feet. Close enough that I could hear him breathe, deep and slow with a slight rasp on the exhale that reminded me of my father's breathing in his last years. Viejo sat down across from me. We stayed like that for over an hour, just breathing in each other's presence. That was his version of comfort, his way of saying I am here, his way of saying you are not alone. There were others. I saw them occasionally. A female, slightly smaller, lighter fur, more cautious. Twice I saw what I believe was a juvenile, a smaller figure moving behind the adults, quick and low. Joseph had told me the family units were small, 3 to 5 individuals. They ranged enormous territories, cycling through camps and food sources that followed seasonal patterns as predictable as tides. I documented everything: dates, times, distances, behaviors. My notebooks filled with the precise handwriting of a man cataloging the impossible. In 2002, I witnessed something that shattered my last remaining assumption about these creatures. I was in the quiet grove at twilight when I heard the knocking. Wood on wood. But this time it was different. It was not random. It was patterned. 3 knocks. Pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again, coming from the north, then an answer from the southeast. Same pattern, 3, 2, 3, then a variation, 3, 2, 2. And the reply matched. 3, 2, 2. They were communicating, not just signaling. Communicating, exchanging information in real time across perhaps a quarter-mile of dense cypress. Adjusting their patterns based on the response. That is not instinct. That is language. Simplified, percussive, lacking in vocabulary by our standards, but language nonetheless. A method of encoding and transmitting meaning across distance. I sat there with my notebook in my lap and my pen frozen over the page, and I thought about my claims forms, about the boxes I checked, about the way my entire profession was built on the assumption that humans are the only species that documents, that records, that communicates with the deliberate intention of being understood. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Then came the spring of 2004. I have never spoken about this to anyone. I was in the quiet grove at dawn when I heard a sound unlike anything before. Not the deep bellow. Higher, thinner, urgent, distress. I followed it and found Viejo standing at the edge of a slough, looking down at the water. The female was tangled in an old gill net, the kind commercial fishermen abandon. Her left arm was wrapped. Every time she pulled, it tightened. She was making that thin, high sound. Viejo stood on the bank making a lower sound, almost a moan, his massive hands opening and closing at his sides. He looked at me. That is the moment I carry. In his eyes I saw something I had seen in 1,000 faces across 1,000 claim inspections. A man watching his house burn down. Helplessness. Please. I waded into the slough, waist deep, warm as bathwater. Things moved against my legs that I chose not to think about. The female recoiled when I reached her. She pulled harder, made a sound that was not distress but warning. A growl so deep I felt it in my bladder. I stopped, held my hands up. Estoy aquí para ayudar, I said. I am here to help. She did not understand the words, but something in my tone or my posture or my scent communicated what language could not. She went still. I cut the net with my pocket knife. 20 minutes. The nylon was embedded in her fur. I was terrified of cutting her skin. My hands were steady. I am an insurance adjuster. I am trained to remain steady in high-stress situations. I have stood on roofs in hurricane winds, walked through fire-gutted buildings while embers still glowed, but nothing prepared me for the feeling of a creature that should not exist going still under my hands, choosing to trust me with her body and her life. When she was free, she climbed out and stood beside Viejo. They both looked at me. Standing in the water, soaked to the chest, holding wet netting and a pocket knife. Viejo took one step toward me, one step. He extended his right hand, palm down, held it in the air between us. I will go to my grave not fully understanding what that gesture meant, but I felt it. The way you feel a change in barometric pressure in your joints. in some deep reptilian part of your brain that remembers a time before language. It was not a handshake, not a wave. It was an acknowledgement, formalized, deliberate. It carried the weight of a contract. I lifted my trembling hand in return. We held there, dripping swamp water, 10 seconds that lasted a lifetime. Then they turned and the forest swallowed them. I stood in that water for a long time after they were gone. My hands were shaking, my pants were ruined, my work boots would never fully dry. I was an insurance adjuster standing waist-deep in a Florida slough, having just performed emergency rescue on a creature that the Smithsonian would say does not exist. And the creature's companion had offered me what I can only describe as a formal acknowledgement. A treaty. A pact made in silence between two species that were never supposed to meet. I climbed out of the water and sat on the bank, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so far beyond anything my life had prepared me for that laughter was the only response left. My whole career had been about assessing what had already happened. Damage already done. Loss already incurred. But this was something happening. Something alive. Something that was just beginning. After that day, everything changed. Viejo left things that were different. Functional things. Medicinal plants bundled with vine, honeycomb wrapped in leaves. Once a map scratched into bark showing a route to a spring of fresh water so clear it looked like liquid glass. A creature with no written language had drawn me a map. I followed that map, through cypress heads and sawgrass flats and across a shallow creek where water moccasins slid off logs at my approach. And I found the spring. Fresh water so clear it looked like liquid glass. You could see the sandy bottom 12 feet down. Fish moved through it like living silver. The trees around the spring were older than anything else in the grove, their trunks massive and knotted, their roots spreading like the fingers of buried giants. It was a sacred place. You could feel it. Not in any religious sense, but in the sense that this was a place that had been known and valued and protected for a very long time. By something that understood the value of clean water, of quiet, of beauty. I sat beside that spring and thought about what it meant that a creature with no written language had drawn a map for me. I thought about my claims forms, my documentation. How much of human knowledge depends on the assumption that we are the only ones capable of recording and transmitting information? And I thought about Joseph Billy's grandmother finding bones after a hurricane, keeping them, passing them forward across a century. The necklace was itself a kind of document, a claims form filed by the earth against human arrogance. There were times during those years when I would sit in my cubicle at Southeastern Mutual staring at a property damage report for a water-stained ceiling in Bonita Springs and think about the fact that less than 100 miles away there existed a civilization that predated every nation on this continent. Then my phone would ring, someone asking about their deductible, and I would answer in the same calm professional voice. Two realities broadcasting inside me at once. One mundane, one miraculous. I was the only receiver tuned to both frequencies, exhausting, exhilarating, lonely beyond description. Elena got sick in 2015, breast cancer. She fought it the way she did everything, quiet ferocity, zero self-pity, surgery, chemotherapy. She lost her hair and joked she finally looked like her mother, who had been bald from alopecia since her 40s. Even in the worst of it, she cooked dinner every night. She said the kitchen was her church and she would not be kept from prayer. During those months, I lay awake listening to her breathe, counting her breaths the way I used to count cypress knees, cataloging something precious that was diminishing. I argued with myself every night. Tell her. She is sick. She deserves the full truth. But morning would come and she would be making huevos rancheros with one hand while adjusting her headscarf with the other. Smiling with those eyes that had loved me since we were 20 in a church parking lot in Hialeah. and I could not do it. I was a coward. I had been a coward for 22 years. Cowardice does not cure itself because the stakes go up. It digs in deeper. I reduced my trips to once a month, then less. Viejo, I believe, understood. On the rare occasions I went, his gifts were simpler, gentler, a single flower, a feather, as if he knew I was carrying something heavy and did not want to add to the weight. Elena died on February 3rd, 2017. 67 years old, in our bed, in our home. Sophia and Marisol holding her hands, me at the foot of the bed unable to speak. The thing I wanted to say, the thing I had wanted to say for 24 years, a truth she no longer had time to hear. I wanted to tell her about the swamp, about Viejo, about the necklace, about the reason I had been far away all those years, the reason I went somewhere even when I was sitting right beside her. I wanted to tell her I had not been running away from her. I had been pulled towards something extraordinary, and I lacked the courage to bring her with me. But her eyes were closed, her breathing was shallow. My daughters were weeping. The moment passed the way all moments pass, irrevocably, without mercy. The funeral was at St. Cecilia's, the same church where we were married, the same church where Sophia and Marisol were baptized. Father Dominguez spoke about Elena's devotion and her warmth and her way of making everyone feel welcome. I sat in the front pew with the bone necklace under my suit, and I thought about all the Sundays Elena and I had sat in that same church. Her hand on my knee, her lips moving in prayer, and I had been thinking about the swamp, about what Viejo was doing, about what signs might be waiting for me at the cypress tree. She had prayed beside a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely, and she never once accused me. She never once raised her voice. She just looked at me sometimes with an expression that I now understand was not confusion or anger, but grief. The grief of a woman who could feel her husband drifting and could not find the current that was carrying him away. I am sorry, Elena. I am so sorry. I put the bone necklace in the cigar box after the funeral. I could not wear it. It felt like carrying a love letter from one world while standing at the grave of another, 4 months before I went back. June of 2017. I walked to the quiet grove expecting nothing. Viejo was there. He was sitting at the base of the cypress tree where we always met. He looked at me, and I saw in his face what I had seen in my own face in the mirror every morning since Elena died. He was older. The fur around his face had grayed. He moved more slowly. And there was something in his eyes that was not just recognition, sympathy. A shared understanding of what time takes from those who live long enough to accumulate things worth losing. I sat down, held out the cigar box, opened it, showed him the necklace. He leaned forward, nostrils flared, made a sound I had never heard, low, soft, almost a hum. It vibrated in my chest. He reached out one massive hand, and with a gentleness that still makes me cry to remember, he touched the bones with the tip of one finger. Just touched them, lightly. The way you touch the face of someone you have lost. These bones were from his kind, from a hand that once gripped branches and cupped water and held young ones learning to walk. Joseph Billy told me they grieved their dead. Now I was watching one grieve a death that happened almost 80 years before his birth. Grieving through remains that a Seminole grandmother thought to keep, that her grandson thought to pass to a Mexican-American insurance adjuster from Hialeah, who had no business being in that swamp. But who was there anyway? Because the world is stranger and more connected than any of us dare to believe. My hands are shaking now, not from emotion this time, from the ALS. The disease is progressing. My neurologist says perhaps a year, perhaps 2, before I lose the ability to speak clearly, before the muscles that form words surrender the way my hands have begun to. I am recording this now because soon I will not be able to. I last saw Viejo 8 months ago, March of 23. I drove to the preserve and walked the old route, slowly, leaning on a cane, my left foot dragging because the ALS has begun to affect my gait. It took 3 times as long as it used to. Trails I once walked in 40 minutes now took nearly 2 hours. I had to stop and rest against trees, catch my breath, wait for the cramping in my calves to pass. I thought about turning back twice. Both times I kept going. Because I had a feeling, the kind of feeling that does not come from logic or evidence or any of the tools I used in my career. A feeling from somewhere older, somewhere deeper. Something told me this might be the last time. I sat at the cypress tree and waited. The preserve was quieter than I remembered, or maybe my hearing was going. Hard to tell which parts of the world are fading and which parts of me. I closed my eyes and breathed the way Joseph taught me 30 years ago. Slow, shallow. Becoming part of the landscape, I did not know if he would come. He came, out of the cypress at dusk. The way he had the first time, moving through golden light with that impossible grace. Slower now, stiffer. The gray in his fur had spread. He sat down across from me, 2 old creatures at the end of their respective roads. I felt the bone necklace against my chest because I had put it back on that morning, and I said out loud, in a voice that was beginning to betray me, "Gracias, viejo, por todo." Thank you, old one, for everything. He tilted his head the way he does when he is processing something. Then he did something he had never done before. He reached out and placed his hand on the ground between us. Palm down, the same gesture from the slough all those years ago, but closer. 6 inches from my knee. I placed my trembling hand beside his. We did not touch, but we were close enough that I could feel the heat from his skin, and he could feel the trembling in mine. We sat like that until the light was gone, until the frogs began to sing, until the swamp became the dark, breathing, ancient thing it has always been. I do not know if I will see him again. I do not know if this story will be believed. I do not know if the necklace will end up in a museum or a landfill or the bottom of a drawer in one of my daughter's houses after I am gone. But I know this. In the big cypress, in the quiet places where the water is black and the trees have been standing since before any nation drew a line on a map, there are beings who walk upright and think and feel and grieve and offer their hands to strangers who have earned their trust. I know because I spent 31 years among them. I know because an old Seminole man trusted me with bones older than this country. I know because a creature with no name that science would recognize looked at me after my wife died and knew my grief without being told. And that knowing was more real than any claim I ever filed. Any damage I ever assessed, any policy I ever wrote. Elena, if there is a place where you can hear this. I am sorry I did not tell you. I am sorry I went somewhere you could not follow. I am sorry that the man you married had a room inside him you never saw. Not because you were not welcome. Because I was afraid opening the door would let in a wind that would change everything. You deserved better than my silence. You deserved the whole truth. But I hope you can understand that some truths are so large they do not fit inside a marriage or a family or a life. They only fit inside the silence between 2 creatures sitting in the dark, breathing the same air, knowing the same sorrow, watching the same stars wheel overhead the way they have for 10,000 years. Indifferent to our categories, our claims, our desperate need to name and file and understand every beautiful, terrifying thing that walks this earth beside us in the dark. My name is Roberto Cisneros. I am 74 years old. I am dying old. And I am telling you the truth.